Welcome to Brew Cheese, where we brew up the finest of cheese. If you're new to our channel, we brew up commander decks on a $25 budget, often with an unexpected twist to keep your playgroup guessing. Today I have for you a delightfully devilish deck tech featuring Experiment Kraj. Kraj is 2 blue, 2 green, and 2 of anything for a 4/6 ooze mutant. It has all activated abilities of any other creature that has a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can tap to put one of those counters on target creature. There are many ways to build Experiment Kraj, but we're going all out combo with it. What's our strategy with the deck? Well, we're going to generate infinite mana by combining effects that produce 2 or more mana, then repeating that by paying only 1 mana. Dump that infinite mana into one of our mini payoffs, and if we don't manage to pull that off, we have a plan B of making our commander infinitely large, making it unblockable, and then swinging in for commander damage. The first of those multi-mana men is Gyre Sage. It's a green and 1 for a 1/2 elf druid with evolve, meaning it gets a +1/+1 counter when we play a creature that is bigger or tougher than it. It can tap for a green for each +1/+1 counter on it. Although evolving it is one way to get a counter on it, we have a number of other methods of putting counters on our creatures, letting this tap for 2 or 3 green in no time. Marwyn the Nurturer is a green and 2 for a 1/1 elf druid, and she gets a +1/+1 counter whenever another elf enters our battlefield, and she taps for an amount of green equal to her power. Although we do have a good number of elves in the deck, 10 to be exact, not counting Marwyn, we can grow Marwyn the same way as Gyre Sage. Viridian Joiner is a green and 2 for a 1/2 elf druid, and it taps for an amount of green equal to its power. Just as with the others, we can grow this pretty easily, but as you'll soon see, the power of Viridian Joiner actually isn't going to matter very much. Karamitra's Acolyte is a green and 3 for a 1/4 human druid, and it taps for an amount of green equal to your devotion to green, meaning for each green mana symbol and the mana cost of your permanents. Incubation Druid is a green and 1 for a 0/2 elf druid, and it taps for 1 mana that any of our lands can produce. If it has a +1/+1 counter on it, it taps for 3 of that mana instead. It can adapt for 3 and 2 green, meaning we put 3 counters on it, but we can get counters on this much easier and cheaper. Gyre Engineer is 1, a green, and a blue for a 1/1 Vidalcan wizard, and it taps for a green and a blue. Oasis Ritualist is a green and 3 for a 2/4 Naga druid. It taps for a mana of any color, or we can tap and exert it to make 2 mana of any color. If Kraj is borrowing this ability, we do have to exert it to produce those 2 mana, but we have multiple ways of untapping him, so exerting him isn't going to matter. Llanowar Tribe is effectively 3 Llanowar elves stapled together, being 3 green for a 3/3 elf druid that taps for 3 green. Weaver of Currents is 1, a green, and a blue for a 2/2 Naga wizard, and it taps for 2 colorless. New Horizons, while not a creature, is a land enchantment for a green and 2, and it allows the land to tap for 2 mana of any color, and it puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control when it enters, making it a little easier to get counters on some of our early game drops before Kraj has hit the field. Our draw suite kicks off with Armorcraft Judge, a green and 3, 3/3 elf artificer that draws us a card when it enters for each creature we control that has a +1/+1 counter on it. In a similar vein is Inspiring Call, a green and 2 for an instant, and it also draws us a card for each creature we control with those counters on them, and it also gives those creatures indestructible this turn, letting us use it to save our important pieces from a board wipe. Shamanic Revelation is 2 green and 3 for a sorcery, and it draws us a card for each creature we control, +1/+1 counter or no. We also gain 4 life for each creature we control that's 4 power or greater. Beast Whisperer is 2 green and 2 for a 2/3 elf druid, and whenever we cast a creature spell, we draw a card. Because the deck is creature heavy, we'll get quite a few activations of this. Kamina's Awakening is 2 blue and 2 for an enchantment, and at the beginning of our upkeep, each player draws a card. However, if we had 10 or more permanents out at any point that Kamina's Awakening was on the board, then we have the City's Blessing, and only we draw that extra card. Colossal Majesty is a green and 2 for an enchantment, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we draw a card if we have at least 1 creature with power 4 or greater. Considering our commander itself is power 4, no difficult feat. Fathom Mage is 2, a green and a blue, for a 1/1 human wizard with Evolve. Whenever a +1/+1 counter is placed on her, we draw a card. This will also be happening quite a bit, possibly allowing several extra cards a turn. We have several creatures that can untap for just 1 mana, like Horseshoe Crab, a blue and 2 crab that's a 1/3, and it has pay a blue, untap Horseshoe Crab. Simic Ragworm is a green and 3 for a 3/3 worm, and it has the same ability. Soliton is 5 generic for a 3/4 artifact creature construct, and it also untaps at the cost of 1 blue. Farmstead Gleaner doesn't untap for 1 mana, but the effect it provides can help us with one of our possible win conditions. It's 3 generic for a 2/2 artifact creature Scarecrow, and it doesn't untap during our untap step. However, we can pay 2 and untap it to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Pilipala is 2 generic for a 1/1, also a Scarecrow, and it has flying. It allows us to pay 2 and untap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, meaning the net cost of the ability is only 1. Freed from the Reel is a blue and 2 for a creature aura, and for the cost of a blue, we can tap or untap the enchanted creature. Pemin's Aura is 2 blue and 1, also for a creature aura, and we can pay a blue to either untap the creature, give it flying, or give it Shroud this turn. We can also pay generic mana into it to shrink its power and grow its toughness, or vice versa. Evasion Graft Mage is a blue and 2 for a 0/0 Vidalcan Wizard Mutant, but it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it thanks to its Graft ability. It also lets us pay a blue and 1 to untap a creature that has a +1/+1 counter on it. This feels like a pretty good point to stop and share the basic interactions going on here. Let's say we have out Kraj, Incubation Druid, and Horseshoe Crab, along with several lands, and with a +1/+1 counter on the Druid and the Crab. This means that Kraj has both the ability to tap for 3 mana of any color, and has the ability to untap for the cost of 1 blue. So we tap Kraj, adding 3 blue to our mana pool. We use 1 of that blue to untap it. Now let's say we tap Kraj to produce 3 green, and use 1 of our previous blue to untap it again. We can repeat this indefinitely and generate infinite green and blue mana. But wait a minute, you might be saying, I distinctly remember some of those creatures tapping for nothing but green. How did they figure in? That's why we're also running cards like Orochi Leafcaller, a single green 1/1 snake shaman that lets us convert green to blue at a 1-to-1 ratio. Less efficiently, but no less valuable, we are also running Nomadic Elf, which is a green and 1 for a 2/2 elf nomad, and it converts a green and 1 to a blue for us. Llanowar Envoy is more or less the same card, just costing 1 more for a 3/2. Then finally there's Prismite, a 2 generic 2/1 golem that converts mana at the cost of 2. It's worth mentioning that we can use Kraj to put +1/+1 counters on our opponent's creatures that might have an interesting activated ability, and so we might call upon these creatures to provide mana other than blue or green to fuel that stolen ability. Back to the example of how the interactions work. Let's say we have out Kraj, Nomadic Elf, Viridian Joiner, and Soliton. The Joiner and Soliton have counters on them, letting Kraj borrow their abilities. When borrowing Viridian Joiner's ability, however, Kraj references its own power rather than that of the Joiner, meaning that Kraj taps for 4 green. We funnel 2 of that green into Nomadic Elf, converting it to a blue, and then activating the ability on Kraj to untap itself, netting us 2 green mana each time. We can later use these filter creatures to convert infinite green into whatever color we may need. There are also some other interesting interactions with our commander. Even with just the Soliton, we can tap our commander to put a +1/+1 counter on itself, thanks to its own ability, and then for 1 blue untap it, letting us permanently grow it for as much blue as we can pump into it. If we had instead, for example, Kraj, Weaver of Currents, and Farmstead Gleaner out with a counter on the latter 2, we can tap Kraj for 2 colorless, then activate the ability borrowed from the Gleaner to untap Kraj and put a +1/+1 counter on it, letting us grow it infinitely. We don't get infinite mana from this interaction, but we do get an infinitely large commander. Of course, to get all of these abilities online, the creatures we're borrowing abilities from have to have +1/+1 counters on them. Although our commander can tap to put a counter on something, this is far too slow for our purposes. Plaxcaster Frogling, a 0/0 frog mutant for a blue, green, and 1, kicks off this category of cards. It has Graft 3, letting it impart its 3+1/+1 counters to new creatures as they enter. It also lets us pay 2 and give a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it Shroud until end of turn, helping us to protect our important pieces. Durable Handicraft is a green and 1 for an enchantment, and it lets us pay an additional 1 when a creature enters our battlefield to have it enter with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. It can also be sacrificed later for a green and 5 to put a counter on each creature we control. Xiangyanggu, Wildcrafter, is a green and 2 for a Planeswalker with 3 loyalty. It lets any of our creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them tap for any color mana, letting us get extra use out of some of our non-mana producing creatures. He can be -1 to put a counter on a creature. Rishkar, Pima Renegade, is a green and 2 for a 2/2 Elf Druid. When it enters, you distribute 2 +1/+1 counters on your creatures, and he lets any of your creatures that do have counters on them tap for green. Hadana's Climb is 1, a green, and a blue for an enchantment, and at the beginning of combat on our turn, we pick a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on. Then, if that creature has at least 3 of those counters on it, we flip Hadana's Climb into Winged Temple of Orazca, a land that taps for a mana of any color, and lets us pay 1 green-blue and tap it to effectively double one of our creature's stats and give it flying until end of turn. Unless we're trying to connect with our commander by making it evasive, or we need the extra mana production, it's best to keep the Climb untransformed so that we can get a bonus counter every turn, but the flexibility is there. Zamet Guildmage is a green and a blue for a 2/2 Elf Wizard. We can pay that same cost, and all of our creatures that enter the battlefield this turn do so with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. We can also pay that cost and remove a counter from one of our creatures to draw a card, giving us some extra cards if we're building up more counters than we need. Leyline of Abundance is 2 green and 2 for an enchantment, and like all Leylines, if we have it in our opening hand, we can put it onto the battlefield for free. It serves this category by letting us pay 2 green and 6 to put a +1/+1 counter on each of our creatures, but it also segues nicely into the next category, one that makes our activations more efficient to more easily pull off an infinite mana combo. It also says that whenever we tap a creature for mana, we add an additional green. This means that if we have to filter green mana, or we have to pay 2 to untap Kraj, we can more easily have the extra mana needed to make the combo infinite. Along those same lines is Heartstone, a 3 mana artifact that reduces all activation costs by 1 to a minimum of 1. This does affect your opponents, but like all symmetrical effects in Commander, we should be benefiting from it more than our opponents, since our deck is built around activated abilities. Biomancer's Familiar is a green and blue for a 2/2 mutant, and it reduces our activated ability cost by 2, also to a minimum of 1. It has another ability to let our creatures adapt again, but that won't come into play most of the time. With one of these abilities, something like Farmstead Gleaner only costs us 1 to untap Kraj, and something like Llanowar Envoy only costs us 1 green to convert mana. Our removal suite kicks off with one of the most flexible removal pieces available to Simic with Beast Within. It's a green and 2 for an instant, and it destroys any permanent and gives its owner a 3/3 beast in trade. Deep Freeze is a blue and 2 for a creature aura, and it reduces the creature to base power toughness 0/4, gives it defender, and most importantly strips it of all other abilities and creature types. Frogify is a blue and 1, also for a creature aura, and it similarly strips the creature of its types and abilities and makes it a 1/1 frog. I like these types of effects because if you use them on a commander, it leaves the commander in play, rather than moving it to the command zone to come back, and it removes abilities, removes types in case it's a tribal commander, and in the case of Deep Freeze, keeps it from attacking, since being a 0/4 or 1/1 doesn't stop some commanders if they have enough +1/+1 counters on them. The downsides are that they can chump block with their transformed commanders to get it out from under it, sacrifice it, or use enchantment removal if they're packing any. Still, the versatility is hard to ignore. Nature's Claim is a single green for an instant speed artifact or enchantment removal. It does give the controller 4 life, but since we're either winning via infinite mana or with an infinitely large commander, 4 life won't be a problem for us. Return to the Earth for a green and 3 hits at instant speed an artifact, enchantment, or flying creature. Instant speed on a removal piece is a huge plus, letting you see what an opponent is going to do with something like a massive flyer before deciding if you want to get rid of it. Capsize is both a removal piece and win condition in one. For 2 blue and 1, it returns any permanent to its owner's hand. It has a buyback cost of 3, meaning that if we pay a total of 6 mana, we get it back afterward. In the situation that we have infinite mana, we can cast this infinite times and return everyone else's permanents, even their lands, to their hands. True, it doesn't outright win you the game, but it's just a matter of time with all of your opponents having completely empty boards. For board wipes, we're packing the best Simic can offer on a budget with River's Rebuke, a sorcery for 2 blue and 4 that bounces everything non-land one player controls back to their hand. It's worth noting that this includes things like mana rocks and enchantments in addition to their creatures, letting you take another player from first place all the way to last. Aetherize is a blue and 3 for an instant, and it returns all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Although this also is only going to affect one opponent, it does let you effectively fog and set them back if they decide to swing their creatures your way. Washout is a blue and 3 for a sorcery, and it lets us name a color and return all permanents of that color to their owner's hands. We do have to be careful since we're playing 2 of the 5 colors, but in most situations we can name one of the colors we're not playing and affect our opponents more than ourselves. To protect ourselves and our combo pieces, we're running a number of counter spells, starting with Counter Spell itself. It's 2 blue for an instant, and it hard counters a spell. Negate is a blue and 1, also an instant, and it counters a non-creature spell, which is the majority of what we'd need to counter to protect our combo when we're trying to go off. Arcane Denial is also a blue and 1, also instant, and it hard counters anything. The controller does get to draw 2 cards at the next upkeep, and we also get 1, but it's fully possible that player may not see the next upkeep step. Dispel counters an instant for 1 blue, which would be the majority of interruptions while we're trying to combo off. Unwind is a blue and 2 for an instant, and it counters a non-creature spell and refunds us with 3 lands untapped. To protect our commander or another important piece, we're also running Alexi's Cloak, which is a creature aura with flash, and it grants the creature Shroud. We can hold this and use it as a pseudo counter spell, letting our opponent waste their removal spell, or we can cast this ahead of time and let them point any removal elsewhere. Ranger's Guile lets us protect something for a single green. It's an instant, and it grants 1 creature hexproof and +1/+1 until end of turn. Turn Aside is a single blue, and it counters a spell that targets one of our permanents, providing a similar function. Our list of true Wincons kicks off with Simic Ascendancy. It's a green and blue for an enchantment, and it lets us pay 1, a green, and a blue to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Every time we do put a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures, we put a growth counter on Ascendancy, and we win on our upkeep if we have 20 or more growth counters. Not only is this a great mana sink for infinite mana, we can get up to 20 growth counters fairly easily if we need to. Fascination is 2 blue and X for a sorcery, and we can choose to either have each player draw X cards, or the mode we're far more likely to pick, to have each player mill their library for X cards. We can pump infinite mana into this and mill out the entire table, then pass the turn and let our opponents lose when they can't draw a card. Increasing Confusion is a blue and X for a sorcery, and it also mills a player for X. We can also flash this back from our graveyard to mill a second opponent. Ambassador Laquatus is 2 blue and 1 for a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard, and he lets us pay 3 into him to mill a player for 3. Mindshrieker is a blue and 1 for a 1/1 Flying Spirit Bird, and we can pay 2 into it to have a player mill for 1, and Mindshrieker adds the milled card CMC as a power toughness bump that round. In the case of both Laquatus and Mindshrieker, we're likely going to just pump infinite mana into them to mill out our opponents. If we do have to fall back on one of our secondary win cons of generating an infinitely large commander, then letting it be chump blocked would be a shame. Herald of Secret Streams is a blue and 3 for a 2/3 Merfolk Warrior, and it makes our creatures with +1/+1 counters on them unblockable. Zagana Utopian Speaker is 2, a green and a blue for a 4/4 Merfolk Wizard. When she enters, she draws us a card so long as we have another creature with a +1/+1 counter on it, and she can adapt 4 for 4 green blue. She gives all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters on them trample. Our mana base begins with Llanowar Reborn, which enters the battlefield tapped and taps for green. It has Graft 1, making it easier to get a counter on one of our important things. Oran Reef the Vastwood enters tapped, taps for green, and can also be tapped to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that hit our field this turn. While this won't hit our important blue pieces, it will speed things up for us by getting our green pieces online. Simic Guildgate and Woodland Stream enter tapped, and tap for either green or blue. Temple of Mystery and Thornwood Falls also enter tapped, and also produce green or blue, but Temple gives us a scry when it enters, and Thornwood Falls gives us 1 life. Yavimaya Coast is the green-blue pain land, entering untapped and tapping for colorless or for green or blue, but dealing 1 to us if we do. Command Tower has seen a recent price drop with its reprinting in the Brawl precons, so we're including it here as well. It taps for either green or blue and enters untapped. The remainder of our mana base consists of 16 islands and 13 forests. Despite some more pricey inclusions in the deck, we managed to build this for $22.20. These prices are using TCG player prices, not a sponsor, and include cards in any condition. Thank you for watching, and if you like what we're doing here, subscribe or share this video with a friend. Or leave a comment telling us what we missed or what you'd like to see in the future. See you again next video.